Oregonians for Science and Reason is a Northwestern United States resource for scientific skeptical news, events, and philosophy that promotes advocacy of public understanding of the scientific method, rational thinking, and the positive effects that such understanding and knowledge can have on people's lives. Please visit us at www.o4sr.org.
That to them is a price, and I think you can appreciate the fear they have, at least, even though you may not share it, and some of you may, but that's a price that they're simply not willing to pay, under the belief that it's either or. So what to do about it? Well, to shed light on this dilemma and help resolve it, what I did was I asked a Jewish scientist, a Christian scientist, and a Muslim scientist, each of whom is convinced about the validity of the theory of evolution by natural selection and is prepared to explain why in great detail, but is also an active participant in their own religion, to answer two questions, two very specific questions, in a book that's titled, "Let there be evolution, let there be evolution reconciling the book of Genesis, the Quran, and the theory of evolution." Question one, as it says up there, is what scientific evidence can you provide to help people of all faiths accept science's theory of evolution? There's not a taint of religion in question one. It's to be answered purely in the rubric of science. And each one did that in his own way. Question two, then, predicated on question one. If that's what you believe about the theory of evolution, how can you, and have you indeed, reconciled that theory of evolution with the scriptures in your faith? And the scriptures meaning the words in the books that are the bedrock of the belief system. For your information, the Jewish scientist that I found happens to be a rabbi, conservative rabbi, David K., Congregation of Ohev Shalom in Orlando, Florida. He's got a degree in ecology, ethology, and evolution. The Christian scientist is Dr. Howard J. Van Til. He's a professor emeritus of physics and astronomy at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he's a member of the Christ Community Church in Spring Lake, Michigan. And the Muslim scientist is Dr. T.O. Shanavas, and he's a pediatrician in Adrian, Michigan, and he's a member of the Islamic Center of Greater Toledo. It's interesting why Dr. Shanavas became interested in this particular project. It's not my project, but in the question of trying to deal with the issues, and it all started with his son. Dr. Shanavas was attending the mosque in Toledo and bringing up his family, his children, in the tradition. And in the tradition, his children went to the religious schools. And in the religious schools, his son was learning about creationism. And he came home to his father one day, and he said, "Dad, I'm confused. I go to school, I go to public school, they're teaching me about the theory of evolution. I go to the mosque, they're teaching me about this creationism which is antithetical to evolution. Can you help me out? What should I believe? What can I believe?" And this started Dr. Shanavas in a long-term project where he studied the Quranic. He's a Quranic scholar now, and he studied the theory of evolution in great detail, and he found a way in his own mind and was comfortable with reconciling it. On the moment, I'll give you some hints about how he was able to do that, but he managed to reconcile the two. Now, what that made him for his son was a role model. He was a role model for his son, a role model of someone who can indeed reconcile the Scripture and the science. But he's more than a role model for his son. He's a role model for all Muslims. Or I'd like him to be. That's my agenda. You know, they say scientists have an agenda. That's my agenda. I'd like Dr. Shanavas to be a role model for all Muslims, as I hope Rabbi Kay will and can be a role model for all Jews. And Dr. Van Til can be a role model for all Christians. And so their answers are a sort of a testimonial to the possibility of reconciliation. Now, unfortunately, Adolf Hitler and Osama bin Laden are also role models to some people. No doubt about that. Witness events. Fortunately, Mahatma Gandhi and Jacob Bronowski are role models for other people, as are Dr. Shanavas, Rabbi Kay, and Howard Van Til. And so is every person in this room a role model. Role models are perhaps the most effective agents of change, for better or worse, in our world. And the most important role models are not necessarily superstars or headliners. They're everyday people. They're coaches, they're teachers, they're parents. But essentially, they're people about whom one would say, you know, I'd like to be like that. I'd like to be like that. It's a role model. And they model themselves on that person. And so in addition to Rabbi Kay, Dr. Shanavas, Dr. Van Til, in addition to Mahatma Gandhi and Jacob Bronowski, if you want to make the world a better place, you could do so just by being a better role model. And I guess if this were a church, as there will be tomorrow morning at the Congregational United Church of Christ, I would probably say a good example is a great sermon, to put it in that language. Now, not surprisingly, the responses of these three scientists to these two questions reveal a lot of similarities in their thinking. They're handpicked by me because I have an agenda, no doubt about it. But also, not surprisingly, you will find differences in their opinions. They don't agree about everything. Would be surprised if they did, because they're coming from different religious perspectives. Here's the point about this. What do you do about this confliction? It's in the best interest of this planet that we focus on the areas of agreement, and we focus on the areas of agreement, rather than dwell upon the differences, which certainly do exist. And it's in our collective interest as a humanity, because we've got to find better ways to share this planet with people that hold other worldviews. Because if we can't find ways to do that, we're going to risk further acts of destruction. Now, in case you're wondering how Rabbi Kay and Drs. Van Til and Shanavas made their reconciliation, just to give you a brief idea of some of the kinds of things they would have to say about this, according to Rabbi Kay and Dr. Van Til, hey, listen, the Bible was never intended to be a book of science in the first place. So it's inappropriate to criticize its science because it's not that in the first place. The Bible is filled with metaphor, deliberately so. And therefore, it doesn't need to be taken literally all the time. The 6 days are not necessarily need to be considered our 24-hour days. A lot of biblical writing is considered as poetry and is intended as poetry and should be afforded poetic license for whatever that's worth. There are stories in the Bible that can be looked at reasonably as morality tales. Noah and the flood. What's that all about? It's not doesn't have to be taken literally. It can be taken, children's stories. They're not all true. The ones you read to your kids or were read to you. Literal flood, literal Noah, literal ark. Maybe it's just a morality tale about what happens to people when they're not worshiping or being obedient to their God. So that's the kinds of things that one could do if one is interested in reconciling Scripture and the science. Now, what about Dr. Shanavas? He's got a different perspective. He doesn't do this. What he does and what he says is this. And he backs it up, and you can criticize his line of reasoning, you take a look at it and do whatever you want with it, but the gist of what he says and the way he sees it is that science is already was embedded in the Koran when it was written. And he said, well, I don't see DNA, I don't see the word nebular hypothesis in the Koran. Of course you don't. But what he argues is that there are expressions and descriptions in which a phenomena, for example, there are terms when they talk about something emerging from the smoke. And he says, well, that's really the nebula, the gas clouds from which a solar system comes into being. And you try to read it in the context of what they're saying, and he finds that that works. And he does it in many places in the Koran, and I can't do justice to his argument, certainly not as well as he can. But that's the kind of thinking, just in case you're wondering how Dr. Shani, other Muslims might do it differently, of course. But and other Muslims, I will tell you, he's not alone. He's not the only person who suggests that modern science was embedded in the Koran when it was written. I'll bet you most people in this room don't know very much about the Koran, nor do I pretend that I'm a Quranic scholar by any means. So, you're kind of mystified and wondering, and rightly so, and maybe the S word, skeptical. And that's okay. Take a look, see if it makes sense, play around with it. But Dr. Shanavas is comfortable with it, for what it's worth. Now, September 11, 2001, certainly not the first demonstration of the human capacity for extreme violence. It wasn't the first day that outrageous acts resulted from ignorance and superstition. On September 11, 2001, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by fanatical religious zealots again. And to paraphrase Franklin Roosevelt's statement, September 11th was one more day which will live in infamy. The remedy to ignorance and superstition is free inquiry. What's the name of the magazine? The remedy is free inquiry. Because without questioning, people are unable to free themselves from ignorance and superstition.
Thanks for watching this video presentation from Oregonians for Science and Reason. For more information on previous and upcoming events, please visit us at www.o4sr.org.